welcome to Cafe Rainy Days. At Cafe Rainy Days, we introduce you to people who are inspirational, who are ordinary people, but who are walking a very extraordinary path. And before I introduce you to today's guest, I would like to make a humble request to please subscribe to the channel. So our guest today is Manjiri Latey. Hi, Manjiri.
Hello.
Manjiri is a telepathic animal and nature communicator. She's also an NLP practitioner and trainer, and she's also the founder of Earthwise. I will put a link to Earthwise underneath, and you can take a look at what all Earthwise do. As an introduction, I would like to quickly tell you a really brief story of how I got introduced to this. So I have a very dear friend, Shubha Chaudhary and Purnendu Chaudhary, and they used Manjiri's student, Gauri Tai, to communicate to their pets. The communication was about an illness that one of the dogs was suffering from. And just to verify that Gauri Tai was actually talking to these dogs, she asked them some specific questions so that the owners would have some sort of a clue. And they came back with amazing clues. So the dog came back with, tell my owners that I love the dal chawal and ghee that she feeds me. Now, these are very specific examples and no more proof is needed. And so I was introduced to this fantastic world. So I would like to thank, of course, Dada and Shubha Chaudhary and Gauri Tai for introducing me to this subject. Another little, really quick piece of information about Manjiri is I would like to just stress how humble she is. I just dropped her a message saying, Manjiri, can we do this conversation, record this conversation? And she straight away sent me an email, and here we are. So thank you, Manjiri.
Pleasure.
So what is telepathic animal and nature communication?
Super. So if we first start by just understanding the phrase telepathy before we extend it in the context of plant or animal communication. So telepathy, again, cut it into tele and pathy. So tele implies anything that's over large distances. So for example, we speak of a telephone or a telephoto lens, a telescope, probably a certain age and stage of audience may understand a telegram. So where anything that comes over large distances and physical proximity is not imperative means tele. Pathy comes from the Greek word pathos, which again means emotions and feelings. And the beauty is emotions and feelings are experienced two-way. So there is a receiving and a giving through our primary five senses. So again, if we combine it, where it's a long distance give and take of emotions and feelings is telepathy in a nutshell. And the same is not only happening between humans. So let's start simplifying it before we go to something in the animal or the nature kingdom. Let's start with humans, which an average person might be able to relate to. You know, you genuinely are thinking of somebody and a phone call comes in or a message comes in and you say, hey, you know what, I was just thinking of you. Implying that when two of them, their thought vibration or just the wavelength, as we commonly say, matches, both of them are going to either send each other messages, or you're sitting in a coffee conversation and you're having a chat and two people complete each other's sentences. So that's again telepathy in everyday life that unfolds with us. With animals, any human who has had an animal in the house, whatever may be the species, they know they're communicating with their animals and the animals can understand them. They don't really need proof per se. For example, they just know when an animal is unwell. The animal knows whether the human is unwell and they spend time with each other. That's how it seamlessly happens with animals. And in nature, if we actually give an example of how people sometimes even plan their holidays, a certain topography or a geography calls out to people saying, you know what, you must go for a holiday to the mountains, you must go for a holiday to the beach, or you're prepared, you're walking through a park and you feel prepared from within to just let your shoes off and walk barefoot. So every element in nature has its own vibrational awareness. Only thing a telepathic communicator does differently is has a specific outcome in mind. So for example, wants to communicate with a diseased human, wants to communicate with a human who's bedridden or unwell, a child who is not verbally capable, has, you know, disabilities, or let's say rather than disabilities, it is our disability to communicate with them. So if they are differently abled, so you want to get through to a child or an animal or a landscape, the logic is the same.
And is telepathy very different to, let's say, things like premonition?
Ideally not. So if we say, a modern human takes 3 compartments in his life. He takes a past, a present, and a future. And when you speak of a premonition, you generally speak of it from a future perspective, that this I think is going to happen. But in energy space, everything is very constant. So time is a continuum where we are segmenting it as 3 separate things. But ideally, so premonition would be a part of telepathy where you're receiving information from a so-called future space, or you feel like I have been here before. You go into a space and you say, yeah, I feel like I've been here before, but my conscious mind doesn't know. So it's also probably a past connect that you have had with the place, but because the time is the same, you are just entering it with awareness at different phases. The continuum is the same.
What sort of people would typically contact you for animal communication? And I've heard you say that anybody can communicate with animals. So what is that extra that an animal communicator has? And what are the issues that you get contacted for?
So if we split your question into 2 segments, what does the animal communicator have different than the average person around? It's probably just self-belief, right. Where we all are born with the belief, but our education system or the way our environment structures us is to constantly question us. The only thing a communicator would do differently, who's actively everyday communicating, is just trust and believe fully what they're receiving, versus somebody who may be dwelling in doubt slightly longer. So that's the only difference, really. And the second part of your question as to what are the kind of people that approach us and what is the genre of cases. So then from somebody who is an author, so I'm going slightly left of the center as well, right, rather than animals and landscapes or whatever. So maybe an author will contact saying, I've written a book, or I've just conceptualized a book, and can we speak to the book and ask it for guidance on what I have envisioned? Is it on the right lines for the right target audience? Or somebody's already written a book, they'll come and say, I really want to get it published with A, B, or C publishing house. Can we ask guidance from the book? So again, from a very common understanding, the book is also an energy. A thought is an energy. You have put in everything into this body of work. And there's so many authors who are defined their sense of self by that book. So you can speak to a book is one thing. There are people who will come from a farmer who probably is a first generation farmer. He doesn't have anybody guiding him. Is unsure why because there's a lot of ancestral wisdom that gets passed down, especially with farming communities.
Of course.
And nowadays there are a lot of youth who want to go back to their roots, so to say, no pun intended, in saying, I want to go back to farming, or I would love to do farming. They somehow don't know how to tap into ancestral wisdom because they don't see it directly. So then they may come and approach saying, I planted something for 2 seasons, it hasn't been blooming. What can be done differently? So then you speak to that patch of land and the land will guide you. That's the second option. Option number 3, which is again one of the most often used globally, is directly for health and well-being of a cat or a dog in the house, or a bird, or any animal that they have in their domesticated space, so to say. Fourth category are, interestingly, a lot of mountaineers who may come and speak, saying, and a lot of them go off record because they, a lot of modern man is you, me, all of us. Ego is in the driving seat for many of us. And then if they have attempted, say, climbing Mount Everest, for example, and they haven't been able to summit, something in the ego is, there's a little chink there. So then they want to know that I have attempted not once, twice, but 3 times, and I've still not been able to summit that mountain. What do I need to do differently? So, all ancient beliefs are that the mountain is a feminine energy. So it's a mountain goddess. And you speak to the goddess and she gives you guidance on, do you need to nullify your ego? Is there any karmic debit credit that needs to be, neutralized before you deserve? Because it is said that the mountain decides who climbs her and who doesn't. So, this is just basic genre. There could be a tree that's not fruiting or flowering at home, or somebody who plants curry leaves, only that plant keeps dying and only lemons flourish. So they want to understand that. So the spectrum is pretty large. Yeah.
And so would you speak to the mountain direct and get answers from the mountain?
Undoubtedly. Yeah.
Curry leaf or curry leaf tree.
Absolute. Yep. Yep.
Okay.
Because they are their energy bodies, not defined only by the physical shape and form, but they are in existence. And yeah, they do have memory. I mean, imagine that mountain has just stood there for eons, watching something unfold around it, people coming up, going down, getting their karma, dumping it there, creating new karma. So it has a lot of wisdom. And so you ask it directly.
Wow, fascinating. So how does the process work? So let's say somebody coming to you and saying, my dog is ill, and I would like to know if they're comfortable, what I can do for them. So what happens next?
So I usually love to involve the family in being a part of the conversation with the animal. The pure intention and the motive is this, that they participate in the two-way communication with their own animal, so that one, they are witness to what is unfolding, and they can continue to ask questions till they don't get closures. For example, an animal says that I have a really bad stomach upset because of this one specific element that you put in my food. Now, rather than me just typing it out for them as a document and sending it over, the human, as a part of that call itself, goes back to the animal and says, hey, you know what, all right, if not this, then what would you like me to give you? So you get closures and actionable plans there itself during the call. So that's why the human is involved. Second aspect is, I would love for a family to walk out of a call knowing that they don't need to be dependent on a communicator. And if it can happen so easily, and what they were getting in their head is not their imagination, but the animal telling them that, and if that is something I can give them confidence for, then they don't need to keep calling a communicator for small things, and just trust themselves in the process. So sometimes, especially for some, illness related aspects, I tell them, what is it that you wish to address? Just send a set of questions earlier if you can. If not, it's like you're doing a con call with another human. You're patching him in onto the call and saying, hey, you know what, this is what your human says. What's your opinion about it? What would you like to do? So it's a very free flowing two-way process. And to just put it in a visual structure, exactly what a telephone does between a human and the other human is what a telepathic communicator will do between a human and the animal. So the communicator doesn't add anything. The communicator doesn't subtract anything. The communicator only submits himself or herself to be a beautiful hollow bone that's non-judgmental, and the free-flowing information goes on two ways. So there is no process really. We have a pre-decided date and a time. The family comes on the call and the chat begins with the animal.
So on that family call, the animal is there as well?
In a telepathic space. So are they necessarily physically present in that space? Not necessary. Sometimes the animal prefers to be a part of the call, so they're sitting on their lap, or the sometimes excited families, very Indian mindset families would love to, they'll have a camera set up on the entire couch, the whole family, joint family will sit, and they'll, purposefully make the animals sit on the lap and saying, we would love to join the call as a family. It's fun because they all enjoy the process of doing it. But is it necessary to have the animal in the physical space? Not at all. And in fact, I even encourage families to say, if you can have the animal in a different room, it is better for you. The reason is, we as humans give so much importance to physical responses and reactions that we value whether something has reached the animal only if the animal turns around, looks at you, wags its tail, which need not, it's not a circus for you to say, okay, now do it, and the animal is going to, smile and wag its tail. The animal could be fast physically asleep, but its soul body is having a very vivid conversation. So if a human is looking at his animal and saying, I asked a question, I don't see a response or a reaction, that's not what we are focusing on. We are so stuck with physicality, and we want to move the family into a non-physical space, so to say. So is it necessary for the animal to be in there? Not at all. Will it be an advantage if the animal is not in the space? Of course, yes.
Right. So when you have a consultation call like that, it's really not just a consultation, but you're also teaching the family to.
Absolutely. It's a default underlying layer. And if I may very openly and blatantly say that it's my vested interest as well in involving them in the call. Because, honestly, Sujata, until maybe about 10 or 15 years back, those of us who grew up with animals, we didn't outsource this ability to anybody else. We would all do it. So if we are now in an age and time of outsourcing everything, we want cut vegetables delivered home. We are so used to outsourcing. Why not just get back in touch with your own abilities? And the vested interest I would have is exactly what you're doing with your animal, you can do with your projects in life. You can do with the documents you're going to sign, your land deals. And the minute the family walks out of the call saying, wow, this applications are so many, why don't I start exploring? You have, through the animal, and the animal is the real medium, change their vibrational awareness at the end of it.
It's also the attitude towards the pets these days, isn't it? So when you call them your children, you always sort of put them one level down. I mean, I remember my dad used to tell us, they lived in a vada, which is an old style house. And one of their cows would insist on walking in through the main door, and she had equal right.
So your observation is absolutely right, where just having hierarchies makes people have a more defined sense of purpose, it almost seems. An average human gets their sense of self by being providers. So if you are not playing the role of being a provider, it's almost as if your sense of self gets compromised. I mean, a parent, all their life, their identity is I'm a parent. Their identity is never who they truly are, right? So first their identity is I'm a daughter, and then I'm somebody's wife, and then I become somebody's mother, and then somebody's grandmother. But who are you? So you're constantly playing that role. And the animals give you that opportunity. Okay, you want to go on your ego trip. You want to be that provider. You want to be the mom to me, makes you feel good. There you go. They don't have any complaints, but a lot of humans would get an animal in because they want to baby somebody and be a caregiver for somebody, because it just seems more meaningful as purposeful in their life.
I'm sure you get this asked quite often. How do you keep yourself hollow? You may have been attacked by a Doberman, and therefore when you are trying to communicate with a Doberman, you might look at it as aggressive, whereas it's not. How do you keep that personal aspect out of it?
Beautiful. So I think this is something we learn from animals most often, and that's the ability of being non-judgmental. And if we first start practicing it with ourselves, right? Also, say, for example, where you said a Doberman has attacked you before, your brain tends to generalize with a filter that if it's happened once, it's always going to happen. But if you approach it from a space of non-judgment, let's say an animal has been beaten quite badly by a human. He doesn't generalize saying all humans are going to be bad. He trusts the next one. So non-judgment and not carrying the past into the present is something animals will teach us most often. So there are a couple of things that I would invite humans to do, something that I personally have really practiced, and it's taken a while. The journey still continues to unfold because your best is always under construction. There's so much still left. First thing is non-judgment. No animal, no tree judges each other and says, what a crooked branch. The tree says, hey, the way you are, you're beautiful. So just no judgment for yourself primarily, not for the others. Second, just leading a more authentic life rather than a constructed life. An authentic life could mean wearing your heart on your sleeve, not wanting to fit in or trying to fit into something. The more you lead an authentic life, the more if I was to put it again from a visual perspective, like a funnel, okay, like this hollow bone, the more constructed we lead, the more dismembered that thing is. So the flow through that pipeline is never going to be even. You'll have compromised things. But the more aligned and authentic life you're leading, that this is who I am, this is how I'm feeling. Say, I don't want to go to somebody's house for a meal that day just because I may be really fatigued and tired, have something else to do. Rather than worrying what they will think about me and compromising on the quality of the interaction, if you were just brutally honest and saying, I can't make it there today because I'm just not up to it. Every truth told, every moment when you're being your authentic self, the more aligned you are, the more you're able to surrender easily, and the flow through that hollow bone is far easier. So just non-judgment, and second, leading a more authentic life rather than a constructed life, I think are the top two things animals teach us then.
And that's the way to be a better communicator.
Undoubtedly. Better human being also, I would say.
Yeah. So have you had any sort of really bizarre replies from animals. You go to ask them something and the family thinks, oh God, we never thought of that. Or, I mean, I'm sure you do all the time, but, anything that springs to mind. And also later on, give us an example. The wildlife just fascinates me and how you communicate.
Bizarre may seem bizarre to a human because he's not expecting it. It may be too out of the blue. Also, they are unaware. Sometimes the information the animal gives, like, damn, is this what the animal knows about my life? Or also, so I mean, there's a plethora of it. Let me just see which episode or incident wants to just surface itself from the bizarre category. Let's take this land related aspect. So the animal constantly, if you realize, there's an average human who has an animal in the space of the house, they know the animal chooses certain spaces to be in. They love their little corners. They'll be earthing and grounding themselves there. They will do this mock digging, and they're very particular that those are the areas that are most earth and grounded. This specific family constantly realized that an animal wouldn't go close to a cupboard. Okay. And it was just one of the curious things that they posed when the chats were unfolding. And the animal says, yeah, if they wouldn't have brought it up, I would have brought it up myself during the call today. I said, oh, great. I mean, great. I wonder who planted the idea in the human's head to begin with. I said, go on. What is the reason that you don't want to sit there? And the animal actually explained to us that specific cupboard was a piece of heirloom that was passed down certain generations. And you know how we have emotional attachments to clothes and things? Unfortunately, we also leave energy imprints in everything that we pass down. Okay, so if you're lovingly passing down something, it carries an energy imprint with it. The animal kept saying that this heirloom that's eventually come into your house carries a lot of energy imprints that are not in the right vibrational space as the house. So you either give it away, donate it, or ask for forgiveness. And it gave some very nice, interesting things. And the animal actually described the entire line of family through whom it was passed down. So some of those grandfather's pictures, this lady did have for reference. And she said, yeah, that's exactly how they are,
so how does the animal refer to these future?
Just humans.
Past generations.
That they would know the kind of analogy we have in our mind or designations that, it's from your father's side and it was this person and it was uncle who did this, and some shady deals were done with the table or rather that piece of furniture, and things were kept in it and stored in it, and not very malicious intentions were held in it. Always the beauty is when an animal brings up a problem, they bring it up only because they know the solution for it. So you are not supposed to sit there and say, oh my God, now what do I do with this piece of furniture? I love it. The animal knows you love it. The animal knows you're emotionally invested in it yourself because generationally it's been passed down. They will give you some of the most practical advice. So they're not going to say, okay, take this piece of wood and burn it off. They will say, all right, do this, ask your grandparents for forgiveness, very simple things, or now start energizing it slightly differently. So that woman, she said, of all the things that I was going to be discussing today, that piece of furniture, the heirloom and what it carries was the last on my list. She said it just popped up. And so funky stuff comes up like this. So the best thing is the agenda should be no agenda when you start a call. The only agenda is, may I be competent and honest in relaying whatever the animal wishes to for his humans. Is just the right intention for whatever flows through will. And your second question was with nature communication, right?
Something about wildlife or nature is just as.
So I'll narrate it slightly differently, Sujata, with your permission. It is something that I observed happening, and then I realized while speaking to that native community what their recipe behind it was, like a mental strategy. So you have these the community called Durvas that live in Chhattisgarh in a small pocket in the country in India, and they consume. So they are traditionally hunter-gatherers. And they don't live off the forest, they live with the forest. Modern man lives off the forest, and so there's a dissonance in vibrational intentions and values. The first time I watched two things happen with the Durvas. One of their village chieftains was running barefoot on a forest floor, and not a stone or a rock poked him even once. while we, the modern man, was there with our, operating here, not operating in the body, with our shoes and boots and our backpacks and everything. And even then people are tumbling and falling. So that evening when we sat down, I asked the village chieftain, I said, what is the reason that all modernization has reached your village, but you still choose to walk barefoot? What is the ideology behind that? And how is it that nothing pokes you? So he said, nothing pokes us because we are not different from the earth. Things will poke you because you're different from the earth. That thought left me thinking for a while. Exactly what the Tarahumara runners do in Mexico. They run barefoot. Again, they don't say you're fighting the ground, you're one with the ground. So you're not fighting anything around you. And humans nowadays are on this fight with everything around us. So we started now incorporating that in our workshops, where just it's as a thought, you disintegrate and become one with everything around. And then you realize when you're in a nature reserve, say you're walking on foot, or even if you're in a vehicle, animals are not running away from you, but they're gravitating towards you, because your vibrational intention is in the same value as them. So they don't see reason to go away, but they say, hey, you know what, you seem parallel to me, let's walk together. So those are few things that we experience. The other I noticed with the Durva is they make a specific chutney out of ants, out of red ants. Okay. They actually go and raid an ant nest. They're red fire ants. They'll raid the nest, they'll get the nest down, and then they'll make chutney out of it to eat with, like a condiment with their food. The ants don't bite these guys. So the first time I watched them get the ant nest down from the tree, any of us going there, we're undoubtedly going to be bitten by these fire ants. So maybe out of a few million, they'll get bitten by one or two. And the entire market space, there were these 5 women who got those ant nests down. Not one was bitten by more than 1 or 2 ants. So again, I went and sat with them saying, what is your thought when you go in? Because it's raiding an entire colony. So they have their young ones, their larvae, an entire family is brought down. So she looked at me very matter-of-factly. She said, what kind of a question is that? I know that I'm going to take only how much we need and not more than that. And that again leaves you thinking that man hoards and takes, like, you go shopping and you buy so many more biscuit packets than what you may need or other things. But when they're living in harmony with nature, you take only what you require, nothing more, nothing less. I mean, when you take these, let's call them recipes of behavior, and apply them in modern context, there's so much that can be more meaningful in life, that your hoarding abilities stop. You start giving away what you don't really need. Pehle to you don't even bring it in before you want to give it away. So yeah, I mean, these may be slightly different than typical examples.
So I said to you before that I wanted to talk to you about, of course, you know of Rupert Sheldrake, and he has written this book, Dogs Who Know That Their Owners Are Coming Home. And he talks about this morphic resonance that he's trying to prove, that it's probably working at that level. And for the layman, I would say it's just working at thought level, isn't it? So the minute you think you want to do this, that, the dog knows. One, give us experiences, about this sort of a thing. And then there's also another thing that he talked about. Rupert Sheldrake says in one of the interviews that you will find that most vets have cancellations because the cat knows that it's going to be taken to the vet. And secondly, if it's really just working at a thought form, all this, and let's assume that people or some people believe in rebirth, then has the animal chosen you rather than you choosing the animal?
So yeah, Rupert Sheldrake's work is immensely profound, and I have devoured every book of his, including attended multiple seminars with him online, especially through the pandemic. There were some really nice seminars that were conducted, and like a greedy person, I went with a bowl fully empty saying, okay, bring it on. But if we were to just simplify it, okay, let's just say it is like cloud computing. And so a certain species has a certain formula that's working well for them for survival and doing things with a path of least resistance. All that goes and fits into this cloud of knowledge. Now, the subsequent generation that is born plugged into this cloud of knowledge already. For a layman to understand this, there are many of our generation who are still struggling with electronic gadgets and media, and where we feel so ditzy, wondering how to go about. But the future generation is already born with that ability. It's almost as if the generation says, hey, you know what, you're still figuring things out. By now, multiple of you have done it. Why should we waste the same time? So the learning curve is completed. We are already born with that ability. Let's raise it higher. So just putting out morphic resonance for a layman to understand who may not have any reading on it. So now let's go back to the example of this gentleman who never had a farming background. His earlier two generations, he only knew up to the father and grandfather, great grandfather and all. He had no idea where they lived or what their lineage was, but he wanted to get into farming. So it probably need not be that he needs to plug into the cloud of knowledge only of his direct lineage, but we did this as an experiment. We said, all right, just earthen ground yourself, set an intention. So I'll take one part of your question here. When you spoke about thought form and energy levels, let's just put out the first clear definition of what an intention would mean. Energy is following the thought. Okay, so an intention means energy follows thought. Where your thought will go, the energies are going to support, right? Now, if my intention is that though I have not had earlier generations into farming, there've always been people who've been farming and probably have already faced the problem that I have with this certain plant. So why not plug into that cloud of knowledge and information? So he just went into a nice alpha state through breathing, relaxation. He set a clear intent that I'm now just going to journey and find out whatever needs to be done. And it's almost as if it's downloaded. And the next two crops, he just intuitively made changes in what had to be done. And he has a flourishing farmyard today. He is now, exploring different fruiting and farming stuff. So this is where he plugged in. Other thing with animals knowing, like this cat and the vet example that you gave, the animals will know not only the day you're taking them to the vet, but the day you've actually made the appointment and made the intention of it. So similar things during some calls, what happens is a pet will say, please ask my parents that not to have a baby right now and to start thinking of a family only a year down the line. And you have the couple look at each other, and the woman looks at me and she says, I am the one who wanted a family. I haven't even verbalized this to my husband yet, but I was going to very soon tell him that now is a good time to start a family. But the animal tells them, right now is not the time, put it on pause. And these are the reasons that X number of months down the line, this will happen. You'll have more financial stability. This is going to unfold. That is going to unfold. Then think of a time to start a family and make a baby together. So these are things that are far more profound than just the animal being taken to the vet. And when you permit the information to come through, you realize how little you know about the world around you, because you have so many filters, and animals have no filters. They're able to see through us, through our intentions, and that's the beauty of it. Another thing that Sheldrake has worked on is this feeling of being stared at. Okay, so there is an entire section in his books where he's researched how, detectives don't stare at the individual they're following. It'll be through peripheral vision or something, because if you're staring directly at them, they would know. And we experience this multiple times, even in wildlife and in the outdoors. So again, let's take energy follows thought as an intention. If you have a telepathic communicator who goes into a tiger reserve and says, you know what, I'm speaking to animals, look how I'm going to have a tiger now cross the path and walk. Our intention is to boost our ego. The intention is not to share space with the animal. The intention itself will be so misplaced that an animal will never show themselves, because they're going to move far away from our vibrational value. But on the contrary, if you go in saying, you know what, I would love to cross paths with you as often as we can during this 2-day stay in the forest, they will come out and show themselves to you almost as if to share their lives from a space of equality, rather than saying one-upmanship, you're amazing or I'm nothing. It's just beautiful space of resonance.
Coexistence.
So that's coexistence. That's one thing. The last question you spoke of was of, would they choose us? I'm going to just introduce a couple of things here, and the audience listening to this can take what they feel they would like to from the buffet. If it resonates with them, they help themselves. Otherwise, they leave it there. So it is believed in a lot of schools of thoughts across the world that a soul needs to take multiple births before it achieves complete nirvana. Or in Sanskrit, we have the word moksha, that means liberation from any more physical births, so to say. And if we simplify it for a common man, it is believed that from one body to the next, there is a life between lives. And during the life between lives, we go into this cosmic space where we have our soul guides and spirit guides, and we sit with them and we basically do a debit and a credit of, I had actually signed up for this. Was I able to do it or not for karmic merit? If not, you choose the next birth. So if we go ahead with this school of thought that there are rebirths and we have what is called soul contracts, then every person we cross paths with, including the two of us right now sharing space, it is believed that we have signed a soul contract, knowingly or unknowingly, that just unfolds because the contract is signed. But the same thing is not only with humans, but it is the contracts we have with the animals as well, and landscapes and spaces. So do they have a soul contract with us? Do they choose us? Undoubtedly, yes. And along with this concept, I'm also going to layer it with one more school of thought, because we've been speaking about vibrational value and all that. So for those who are interested, they can read more about it. And this is based on the work of Dr. David Hawkins, who has written a book called Power versus Force, okay, or an eye for the eye. And what he has done is he's made a chart of levels of consciousness. Okay, now levels of consciousness, where if you ask, at the bottom, it starts with guilt and shame and anger and, that are feeding the ego or where it's stuck in the body. And then it rises in consciousness to where there is acceptance, neutrality, forgiveness, love, something that filters more into a spiritual space. Now, the reason I'm bringing this up here is an animal comes into our life with a soul contract to actually make our lives better. Okay. And there is a reason. So if we use this levels of consciousness chart, you ask any average human what his dominant emotions are in any typical day. A modern man will tell you anger, frustration, guilt. That means we are at much lower vibrations, which are just about 20, 30, 40. This is the vibrational value he's been able to measure through kinesiology. An average animal, you ask an animal or observe, you don't even need rocket science. You observe an average animal, what their dominant emotions will be are love, forgiveness, acceptance, neutrality. They are at a much higher vibrational plane. So now let's take an analogy of somebody fallen into a pit. The one in the pit is a human with low vibrational emotions, and an animal is above to bring the human out of that space. So when they have a soul contract with us, they are in our lives to actually throw us a rope line and say, dude, you need to come up here. So when we baby them and when we say, my little boy, we're not doing justice to their spiritual presence. So they do have soul contracts with us. And usually it is purely and purely for the fact that we need to be made better human beings off.
On that note, so I had a guest recently on the channel, Revati, who does past life regression. And she was talking about plants. And she said in her experience and in her meditations, she sees plants to only have the chakras above your heart. And she says that's why when you go and pluck a tomato or an apple off the tree or plant, they are happy to give because their chakras start from love, from heart.
Thank you to Revati for putting that out from her end and her experience as well. And just to add a couple of things to that, if you were to superimpose this emotional levels of consciousness with the Vibgyor, okay, so you have violet, indigo, green, blue going all the way down to orange and red. The same if you superimpose it with the human body. So actually lower chakras are all red, orange, blue, green, and then they start becoming violet, indigo on the top. Now think about this. Trees and plants have lived on this planet far more than four-legged or single-cell animals have, for that matter as well. So they have been here, done that far longer than we have. Unfortunately, with our skewed sense of justice and judgment, we think it's okay to cut a plant, but not okay to cut up an animal. But they have been here longer. They have a higher vibrational value, right? So now if we pick up even Revati's discussions with you and the content there, they undoubtedly have far higher vibrations. So a tree will never come back and say, you know what, you didn't take permission when you plucked something. Now I'm not going to flower tomorrow. They are just there to give, because all the lower vibrational things, they're over and done with. They have lived it. The next generation, again, from a morphic space, has realized what is really needed most. And they are just evolving from that point onwards. And that is why somebody feels more healed after eating green leafy vegetables rather than meat, because it's higher vibrational. That is why a lot of our religious practices, whatever religion one belongs to, will have some nature element in it. Go, do some circumventing a tree, bring some element of water. So every religion will have water involved in it in their own way. Wash, cook, eat, clean, something, spray. Meaning water also, again, part of this high vibrational. They have far higher awareness than us.
Completely changing the topic from this really deep, it's a fascinating discussion, but just to sort of take the conversation to a more lighter note, have you sort of done conversations with reptiles or snakes or crocodiles or insects, and give us a couple of examples, and what do they have to say? And why did you need to talk to them?
Why not would also be a question. Because we would have birds and bees and critters and creepy crawlies around us all the time.
Of course.
Just that we find it easier to smack and squat them rather than learn how to coexist with them. So for example, a beehive or any community animal for that matter, that's a flock of birds or an anthill, termite mound. You can actually, you speak to one or you speak to the alpha or you speak to all. It's anyway one common collective awareness that speaks to you. So like a beehive, there are so many places where in a city they need to bring a beehive down because the humans are threatened by it. They aren't doing anything. They're not going and stinging, biting, nothing. They're doing their own jazz, but they don't want that around. At the same time, that same human will take objection, but go to a supermarket and buy honey and come back. So you're wondering, if you don't want them around, where is that going to come, the produce going to come from? So this coexisting. So sometimes we ask the beehive for guidance. What would you like the humans around here to understand and do differently so that both can continue to live in harmony and coexist? There are times where the bees know that, you know what, if we're going to be like wasps as well, when you tell them that the entire thing is going to be, cut down, burned by the humans here because they're intolerant towards you, sometimes they ask for time. That can you give us X number of days? We'll do our best to move the larvae or we'll move away from there. Sometimes if it's feasible, they do meet you halfway. There are other times when they know that it's not possible, it's not feasible. They don't mind whatever is going to unfold, but they actually know what harm it's going to do for the humans than their own species. So they say, okay, dig your grave deeper, no worries, let us go. There are times where people have infestations in the house. So they have cockroach infestations, or they have, other kinds of roaches. They'll have rat infestation, mites, bed bugs, or large amount of ants in their walls as well. So when you're chatting with these animals that fall under infestation, what animals and nature tends to do is mirror us humans. Okay, so that's one of the probabilities. So sometimes when there is a massive infestation of something, the animals will say, we're only mirroring this human's internal state. Have you seen the clutter and the infestation of thoughts the person has? You open any cupboard, there's an avalanche coming out. The person has infestations enough and he doesn't like this, just with the purpose of having us leave, at least for that reason, he'll start cleaning up and his life starts ironing itself out. So sometimes they are there to just teach a human a lesson. They're happy to do that. And they'll move away very easily without any resistance altogether. And then, of course, snakes and reptiles and whatever, every time we're outdoors, they're all around us. And nothing would, actually snakes are more gentleman-like than humans are. Because humans find it easier to feel afraid and hit and kill, but a reptile would never attack until not threatened. So if you leave them, you're respectful of them, everybody can, be peacefully existing. So so many examples like that.
And talk a bit about, you find you have dogs who can detect cancer, for example. So talk about animals and illness and how they can pick on illnesses
Beautiful.
warn you, where they have this premonition that the owner is going to have an accident, and they try to stop the person from going. Give us a couple of examples, or your experience with it.
Absolutely. So again, before animals were playing that important role in our lives, those who didn't have animals trusted the elders in their family to tell you not to go, and a gut feeling or an intuition. Even a parent would tell a child, don't go on a holiday this time, otherwise I don't tell you, or don't go for that dinner today, is because there is something intuitively telling them that something untoward may unfold, and so stop. But what we don't listen coming from a human, our higher self tells us the path of least resistance is when it comes from an animal. I don't know if that makes sense. So for example, you are asking for unconditional love, and the universe says amen to it and gives you a family member who loves you unconditionally, or a friend who loves you unconditionally, but you doubt and suspect it, saying this person probably has some ulterior motive. So you have filters. So you're asking for unconditional love, but you don't like the way it's reaching you. So then the path of least resistance becomes a dog or a cat who you say, hey, you know what, I need unconditional love. You become that path. The same thing applies to our illnesses as well, or diseases. So when you say something is not at ease, it's a disease. A human tells you that it's a path of resistance. An animal tells you that it's a path of least resistance, right? So what animals tend to do specifically for premonition or preemptive things, they either tend to mirror us, like we discussed earlier. So what's happening with the human can be seen also happening with the animal. The second thing they do is, because they're at a higher vibrational value and they are not defined by their bodies, they may take on, so they act like a little vacuum cleaner, and they may suck out of a human what they foresee is going to unfold. But because they are not their body, they are not suffering, they're able to earth and ground it like an earthing wire in a plug point, right? So sometimes they may suck out and also help the human, heal the human in that way, like what therapy animals may do with patients in a hospital. We have horses and dogs. They just higher vibrational plane that goes in, absorbs what they can, earth and ground it, move to the next patient, so on and so forth. And the third probability is, of course, that what the animal could be going through and what the human could be going through, could be their own soul's journey. So in the soul contract that we discussed earlier, if the animal and the human have both signed up for some amount of suffering, then whatever you do, you have to complete your contract of that physical suffering, right? So then no amount of interventions will help. But if we go to the first two, where the animal may sniff out an illness, or tell you what is wrong. So they may either, so now through all the training and teaching, through therapeutic work, animals have been taught how, through their olfactory sense, like they would sniff out drugs, they're trained separately to sniff out certain cells in the body. So if a person with diabetes will have a certain smell to their body that the animal can catch. Somebody again with cancer cells that are developing, the animal will be able to find that out. So they are doing a job. So that's where they are trained. Okay, his job is to go to work and do this. But they're also doing a job with their families. So he need not be taken to a physician who has a sniffing dog. Their own dogs are doing it at home. And what our animals actually tell us is, it's like a first soft knock on the door. If you open the door at that same time, the animal doesn't need to do it so apparently. So our body may start showing a first few symptoms, and the animal either starts mirroring or taking on. If you catch it, then the animal says, phew, you understood what I wanted to convey. Start fixing your lifestyle, start having healthy thoughts and doing good things. So it's cut in the nip itself, but, or rather nipped in the bud. But if it still escalates and you haven't heard the first few knocks from the animal, then the animal may put on some very apparent behavior, like coming and sniffing that area, refusing to sit anywhere else but your, say, crotch, groin, your lymph nodes, wherever there are lymph nodes in the body. That's where sometimes they'll go and sit, because they are doing their job of earthing, grounding, and telling you that this part of the body needs more attention. So they love doing jobs because they love to have a purpose to their lives. And they say, I am here in your life, make use of me.
Wow, amazing. Amazing. So 2 last questions, and I'll let you choose which one you want to do first. So animals' attitude towards birth is, I think, similar to humans, where they get excited, etc. And death is another thing that they don't seem to make a fuss about. Also, you hear stories of elephants knowing when they're going to die, and they go away into this secluded place where they've decided. What's your experience with either death or birth?
Good question. We can take both into the quick answer. If we understand that animals are not defined by their bodies, therefore are not stuck in their bodies, they are not their body. Okay, so whether it's birth or death, they see it quite matter-of-factly.
So for them, they know that they are not their body.
They are not their body. They're fully aware of it. So if you ask a pedigree animal, as racial as humans are in our own ways in different parts of the world, you would rather have a pedigree in your house than you would have a street or a stray animal. And if you ask the animal what breed you are, they don't know, because they are not saying I'm more superior to you. On similar counts, if you ask an animal that today you have to leave your house and you have to move houses, what will you carry with you? They don't carry anything with them, not even a toy, because they are not the toy and they don't need the toy to define happiness for them. So they are not the body, they are not defined by it, therefore they're not stuck in it. So whether it's birth or death, they see it quite matter-of-factly that I've come in, my soul contract is this, and I drop that vehicle. It's like you're dropping the clothing, the soul is still on his journey. So are they defined by this space of elation? Oh my God, I've given birth. Not the way the humans have. There's so many species where the children are born without the mother being around. There's so many species where the dependence on the mother is for a very small period of time. Even in apes that are closest to us, the mother is not with the child the entire time and doesn't expect the child to do something for her or the father until death do them apart, so to say. Yes. These are our social norms that we have formulated. But if you see it from the animal's lens, they are not seeing suffering the way we do, so they don't fear death. They also don't fear death because they have no materialism in their life. So they are not going to worry what is going to happen of all my land and property and car after I am gone. And these places that I am still to holiday, go on holiday. So they see it so neutrally and so, in Sanskrit, we have a word called anichyata, which means impermanence. And something like Buddhism actually built on that impermanence is the way of life. And animals actually live and breathe impermanence. They may be upset with the human this breath, the next breath they've even forgotten about it and they'll come with a wagging tail. A human, on the other hand, will carry that karmic baggage with them all along. So animals are very neutral and nonplussed about both birth and death. And on the same count, I would love to add then that when we decide to neuter an animal, a lot of humans go through this emotional thing. Am I doing the right thing? Am I taking away the right of motherhood from the animal? Now, if we give this thought, okay, and this is some animals have shared with us. A dog, I remember, turned around once and said, what is the big deal about this? My human has made all the decisions for me. When I'm going to go pee and poop, my human decides what I'm going to eat. My human decides when I go for a walk. Every decision my human is making for me, then why not the decision of neutering me if it's well placed, if the intention is good? So it's suddenly, where do you have this question of morality coming up in your mind where you can't even give me choice of my bladder? How are you then asking me suddenly what do I want to do with my uterus and my womb? She said, if you're making so many decisions and your intentions are well placed, go ahead and get me neutered. I have no problems. Some animals have actually recommended neutering purely because, in our genetic system, specifically even in our Asian cultures, we have what is called the gotra. That means one bloodline doesn't marry into the same bloodline. Otherwise, there are genetic issues. You have a mixed bloodline. With the penchant and this need for having pedigree animals, there's a lot of unethical, illegal breeding practices where siblings are interbred and, there's a lot of inbreeding happening. There's so many genetic issues that the animals are born with. So sometimes an animal actually is very forthcoming in saying the amount of genetic issues I have, it's best you don't breed me because they'll be carried forward. So just neuter me, and you want me for who I am and not for my breeding abilities per se. So go ahead and get me neutered. And that's why you realize that they think so practically and simplistically. And they see birth and death as such a flat, neutral continuum that they are not defined by either. So yeah, if that answers the question on birth and death.
Yes, it definitely does. I would love for you to talk about your teachers. Where did you learn? How was your experience when you trained with them? Please.
Absolutely. So one of my first teachers is one of the most down-to-earth and amazing human beings I know. Her name is Maya Kincaid. She's based out of Arizona in the US. So 12, 13 years back, I was doing online classes with her on Skype before all Zoom and everything came up from different time zones. And the way she taught it was very matter of factly. So there was no, nothing to enter this space that you need to do this. And there was no acts of omission or commission for you to qualify to be doing this.
Right.
So from her, I learned humility and just very matter of fact working. The second teacher, so I'm giving you a list of few who are still actively teaching, that even people feel that they want to walk the path they can. The second individual, her name is Carol Gurney. She runs the Gurney School of Animal Communication in California. So I traveled to the US. She was conducting workshops at her house, and that's where I learned with her. The third teacher, her name is Kim Pickett, who worked as a bionic healer and also worked as a psychic medium for the CIA and the FBI at that time. So just working with psychic abilities, astral travel, so many things that can be done from psychic space. I learned with her greatly. But some of the greatest teachers, other than, of course, through books, when you have direct access to somebody like a Rupert Sheldrake, you devour the work, and then when you meet them online, you're able to get a few things. But their books have acted as the best method. So Rupert Sheldrake's books, then Dr. David Hawkins' books. There is also The Biology of Belief by Dr. Bruce Lipton, which speaks about how our beliefs change our entire chemical composition. And then some of the other teachers who have been very unconventional. One of them is Wim Hof, who is known as the Iceman, and he's one of the superhuman. And so I spent about a 10-day workshop with him, and you just learn how to seamlessly be non-assumptive. And it was beautiful to watch him interact with elements of nature, because it brings about higher elemental balance. And then without a doubt, some of the best teachers have been the native communities that I've interacted with. So they come from, so they are not running any workshops, so they don't run schools, and they don't have internet channels and nothing of that nature. They're leading their life a certain way, and all you need to do is a fly on the wall. And if you are the one talking, you learn very little. So when I am with native communities or with Buddhist monks, meeting them in the Himalayas or somewhere towards the Nepal Himalayas, you just have to be an observer neutrally. And I think you come back with far more. So it's either the Buddhist monks, native communities, not only in India, but even Andaman, Nicobar, that belt, a lot of Central and South American belts where I've traveled, and Africa, gorgeous beliefs. I'm just going to put this out there because I genuinely believe it. So whether it's these tribal belts in our country, Africa, or Central and South America, I think the land that has the most wisdom is probably also the most tumultuous. So some of the worst political issues or a lot of strife is unfolding around these areas, almost as if to test these native people, saying, you know what, you're in the deep end of the pool. It's a fire walk. Let's see how you're able to do it. But through all that, they just come out so glorious. So they have probably been some of the most profound teachers in my life as well. And then, of course, last but not the least, nature and animals themselves are the best teachers you can ever learn with.
Fantastic. It's been amazing, Manjiri. You're just, the way you explain things is absolutely amazing. And what you had to share is, to some may sound really woo-woo, but you just need to open your eyes and ears, and it's all around you. And the examples you gave us were just amazing. And you're no better spokesperson for the animal and nature world. Thank you. Thank you so much, Manjiri. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. All the best.
Thank you.